Hello, welcome to the From Way Downtown Pacers podcast. I am Pacers editor Nat Newell for the IndyStar, here with Dustin Dopirak, our Pacers insider, coming off I don't want to say shocking, but certainly surprising road win over the best team in the NBA, the Cleveland Cavaliers, last night. Uh, they hadn't lost. Pacers had not lost in 2025. They'd beaten the Celtics recently. You know, they've got a bunch of good wins. So I don't want to, again, I'm not shocked, but I guess I am shocked by how it went down with Tyrese Haliburton getting hurt and then, really turning it up a notch. What were your thoughts watching it in person last night?
Yeah, no, I am shocked, actually. I think just it's weird to see, again, a team 33-4, had won 12 straight, just have the bottom fall out and say, like, all right, like, you're Indiana Pacers, the team that, I tweeted this last night, like, you have seen the Indiana Pacers give up 152 points a game and win. Yeah. And so, like, after, 2 seasons of that being an all offense, like, Tyrese Haliburton has used the phrase, like, man, last year we didn't guard anybody. And, I'm sure some other guys are like, speak for yourself, Ty. But, to see that group turn up the screws and hold Cleveland to 40 points. And again, that's the most efficient offense in the NBA, second leading scoring team in the NBA behind Memphis, and just barely coming into the game. I think they were like 122.9, and Memphis it was like 123 flat. So like they're right about the top, leading scoring team in the East, most efficient team in the NBA. Throwing all these all-stars out there, they're busting up everybody. Like we're not far off of record pace. And like they could see Golden State 73-9 from there, and to hold those guys to 40 in the second half, 4 of 20 in the third quarter. It was like 11 of 39 for the half. Is wild. And again, like this, again, it's turning up full court pressure and getting them to turn the ball over in the backcourt and all those kinds of things. Like, you haven't seen, the Pacers have been dramatically better defensively, lately, especially in the last 15. And with Andrew Nembhard back, but like, that's not a defensive performance I saw coming. Certainly, like they did some good work in the first quarter. Basically, after they fall behind 10-0, they hold them to 9 points the rest of the period. They're up 21-19 after one. But you started to see like the wheels come off in the second quarter. You're like, okay, well, this is what you would expect. They're on the road, and then you lose Haliburton. It's like, okay, well, they're just going to coast in this one. Maybe they get beat by 20 again, but they might actually have a shot to come back and win in Indianapolis. And not only that, they could lose both of these games. I thought it was really important that they won enough to be 3 above 500, and be in a space where you could lose both of these and still be over 500. But yeah, for them to turn it around like that, it's not a thing that I saw coming.
Yeah, it has to be. It is certainly on the list of the best single game defensive performances in the NBA this year. If it's not the number one defensive performance. And so, yeah, that is shocking. The fact that they could beat the Cavs, is surprising, but not shocking. But how they did it is, again, we get back to the fact that Andrew Nembhard is the best player in the NBA. And that's, that was what makes the difference.
Yeah. He does change. He does change everything. He really does. And I think it's, I knew he was a big deal. I think he is actually overperforming my expectations. I did think, Nembhard, Shepherd, Nesmith back was going to make a difference. And obviously they're still waiting for Aaron Nesmith. And I, again, kept trying to tell make the kind of dichotomy, like kind of the maybe contradicting, cases that, these guys are better than you think. They matter more to how they play than you think. These are more important injuries than just how many points and assists they have per game shows. But, they still should have been able to win more games than they did with the guys they still had. But the connectivity has been amazing. The way he's able to connect pieces on offense has been a big deal. But just defensively, he's always been good. He's been at a different level. He's turning guys over. He is making everybody work. It's been a while since you've seen, a top perimeter scorer, basically the guy that Nembhard's guarding, really go off. He slowed Tatum down in Boston.
Well,
I mean,
what he
Dame.
does against size is really impressive too. I
What's
mean,
that?
what he does against bigger players
Yeah.
is really impressive too.
Mhm. Yeah, no, he's there is still a level. Obviously, there's a level of big guy that is kind of beyond him still. But even remember, even going back to his rookie year, I mean, like he took on LeBron,
Yeah.
and there were times when they did what you would kind of consider a cross match, with Nesmith and Nembhard, where sometimes you would think, well, wouldn't you want Nesmith on the bigger guy? And sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they put Nembhard on the bigger guy, and it's just basically like who's got the ball more. But he's taken on the Kawhis, like Paul George's, stuff like that in the past, and been pretty good about it. And he is, because he fights, he pushes those guys away and from the rim and makes them shoot over him, and does a really good job at it. He just gets up into people and is doing a better job of doing it without out fouling. They're letting them play a little bit more, and Nembhard's taking advantage of that a little bit, I think, and knows kind of where the line is. Has a better sense of where the line is, and the line is a little bit further back than it used to be. So all of that is helping his cause. He's getting into people, playing physical, and slowing them down.
It was interesting to me. Coincidentally, the Pacers traded Caris LeVert to the Cavs for a first and a second round pick. The second round pick was Andrew Nembhard. So we had an exchange over who won that, quote unquote, won that trade. I wrote something up about the Paul George trade, because obviously Oladipo was traded for LeVert, and then you traded LeVert for these two players.
Right.
It's just fast. I think it goes back to, number one, the job Kevin Pritchard has done. I mean, for years and years and years, I thought Kevin Pritchard has done a great job, except they've never won a first-round playoff series. So it's a little hard to be too pro Kevin Pritchard. But they went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. They're now the fifth in the East, and a half game out of fourth, I believe. So, and I think it's a credit to Rick Carlisle too, where they're 10-15. In this day and age, it is so easy to panic over anything.
Right.
With him, Carlisle's not going to panic. I mean, Pritchard's giving him a good group. Carlisle's not going to panic. That's credit to the players too, but it just seems like this team is well put together from that standpoint to get to here, obviously, to be as successful as they've been this year.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked, I think, a lot over the last 3 seasons about how good the personalities are, and it was weird to see them struggle as long as they did without pulling it together. And you started to wonder, like, okay, are they going to get it right? But I remember there were people who were starting to ask me on Twitter, like, do you think this, do you think he needs to go? And there were a not small number of people who said they do. And obviously that's Twitter. And at any given point in time, you can find, the 100 people on Twitter who think anybody needs to be fired. But still, you start to think, okay, like, are they going to pull it out, or are they going to have a disappointing season? And are they going to miss the mark, entirely? But, again, I think Carlisle, is in a good place in the sense of, again, he's been around. By all accounts, this is a guy who's mellowed a whole heck of a lot, and just trust that, all right, if they put the work in and they identify what the problem is and work on fixing it, then they'll be able to do that. Again, like it sounds dumb, but the practice time mattered. I mean, it says a lot that they made the most out of that. We're only talking about maybe 4 or 5 days of practice. And it's been a while since they've had one now. I think the last practice I can recall was the day, they were in Sacramento for 3 days and they had a practice there. And so they've had walkthroughs and some shoot arounds on the road, but not much at the end of the day in terms of being able to work together. But they've been able to carry on a lot of the things that they picked up in those practices in mid-December. And they just reconnected, sort of reminded everybody what their principles are, and just reminded everybody how to work together, I think. And because there was so much kind of in and out, with missing guys and then Nembhard coming back and having a minutes restriction and kind of slowly working him back to what they needed to be. And they had to redefine an identity and, sort of refigure out what their identity has to be and how they have to operate and how they have to function. And they did it, and they've stuck to it, over that much time. And he's been able to say, okay, this is what our standards have to be. This is, what we have to do to win basketball games. And I think they had to rediscover a formula, kind of figure out a new one. Obviously, still missing Neesmith, but having these guys be a little bit different than they were, a year ago. And so, like, he has been able to kind of say, kind of take a step back and say, all right, what is wrong? What do we have to do to fix it? Like, when we, how much of it is missing guys? What can we do when we get those guys back? What is the formula that we have to do and that we can do to be a winning team? And I think it has been, it's been a really impressive, again, coaching class. And again, it's said a lot about these guys. They've been like, all right, 25 in, nobody panic, nobody let go of the rope. I think TJ McConnell said it pretty well. I think when they won in Sacramento, and he said, he says, I'm really proud that we didn't press the panic button when everybody else did. That when everybody else was thinking, this is a sinking ship and this team is falling apart at the seams, we didn't buy into that. And they didn't, and they're in a dramatically better place, and they're, either right where they were last year or a little bit better.
How real do you think this is? And obviously, I don't mean they're now the best team in the NBA, sure. But obviously they won. They haven't lost yet in 2025. They were showing real strong signs of getting better at the end of 2024. Is this who they are now in terms of being a legit top 4 team in the East? Let's use that as the definition.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're a top 4 team in the East. I mean, I think my initial thought is they are where they belong, which is to say that I do think, I mean, are they going to? Okay, no, this is what I would say. My simple answer is they're not a top 4 team in the East because I expect Orlando. I expect Cleveland, the Celtics, and the Knicks to keep a gap in ahead of everybody else. I mean, there are losses coming for the Pacers. Like they're not going to run the table in 2005 or 2025. I know I'm taking all of your hopes away. They are going to lose games. I'd be surprised if they don't lose Tuesday, because that's how these things tend to go, is when they play, two games against 2 teams. Usually, the Pacers have generally, when they've lost the first game, they've generally won the second one. But so I imagine Cleveland will be like, we are not losing 2 games to these guys. And I think they're going to, so I think the Pacers are going to have a really hard time winning Tuesday. But still, a split with this, you'll take that every day of the week if you're the Pacers. But there are going to be losses coming. I mean, it's going to be a weird adjustment when they go to Paris and then come back. That's going to be a whole deal, basically, and just ingesting that basically is going to be weird. And I have no idea what the effect of that is going to be. And then, like, 2 weeks later, they're going to have a West Coast trip, and so there is going to be some wear and tear from that. Might lose a game they got no business losing in there. We'll see. I imagine there are going to be trials and tribulations coming up, but I think they belong in the pack they're in. And, with the pack they're in, I mean, Milwaukee, Miami, Detroit, Orlando. I think they belong there. I do think, again, that Orlando is going to put a gap between them and the rest of those teams because they're going to get Banchero back. I guess they're probably going to get Wagner back in the not too distant future, I guess, if it's similar injuries. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've been missing that. But I mean, if those guys get back to full strength, it's been remarkable that they've hung around like they have. I mean, Orlando's tough. And Jamal Mosley's doing a great job. I think Kenny Atkinson will probably be coach of the year, but I mean, like, Mosley would win it most of other years for what he's doing. With that group, he's been phenomenal. So, I think Orlando will end up creating a little bit of separation there. Milwaukee end up closing. I think there's a good chance the Pacers end up 6th again. That probably makes sense. Maybe Milwaukee ends up getting an edge on them at the end, for 5th. But I mean, they belong in this pack. I think they'll ultimately it makes sense to me that they'll stay ahead of, the Miamis, the Detroits, the Atlantas, we're all pretty close. I mean, like, you're looking at, it's not going to take a long streak for them to be 9th. Like, if things go the opposite direction, they can go from 5th to 9th really fast. There's basically very little separation there between 4th and 9th in the East right now. So, but I do think they're a top 6 team in the East. Top 4, I think it's going to be hard for them to get, but I mean, I think they're going to end up being a solid playoff team. And I think that's where that's where they were last year. I think that's where they belong this year.
So you heard it here first. Dustin calling the first round Knicks Pacers playoff series.
Could happen
on January 13th. Haliburton
Book your hotels now because they're expensive. I might book my hotel now.
Hamstring pull. I doubt we know anything more now than we did last night, which was not very much.
Yeah.
He's not the same player he was the beginning of last year, very clearly. He has games where he is, but he's not that consistently. Where are they at with Haliburton? Where's Haliburton at? How does he fit into this team right now?
Yeah, I mean, he's still pretty good. I mean, I think he's not quite the just, utter dynamo that he was in that stretch. But I mean, like while we're talking, I will look up his, last 15 games. I mean, like you can't sit here and not sit here, but like you can't say that he hasn't been really important to what they've done over the last 15, and he's like, last night obviously is going to hurt his numbers pretty significantly, but like he's still been, like one of their best scorers. He's second on the team in that stretch, 19.2 per game. Like his numbers over the last, over the last 15 is they've won 12 of their last 15, pretty well approximate, his overall stats last year. So you're, last 15, 19.2 per game, 49% from the floor, 40.5% from three, 87.5% from the line, 9.5 assists, 1.6 turnovers, 1.3 steals, plus 8.8 per game, as far as plus minus is concerned. He's been really important. Again, like he has not been, like last year, he was all NBA Cup, team or whatever, and then the other four guys were Hall of Famers, basically. And he got one MVP vote from somebody who might have caught a lot of hell for it. But like it has changed. Obviously, everybody expects him now, and he's not the type of he's not built physically in the way that he can just decide to go get you 35 because he's going to just drill his lane, his way into the lane and bounce off people and hit a 5-6 footer, or 10 footer or whatever, like, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Brunson and, Luka Doncic and, like the top of the line guards in the league can do that. They're physically built to do that. Like that's not him. But you're starting to see him get back to what he is good at. I mean, like obviously, like the Boston game still stands as an outlier when he had 10 2-point buckets, and a lot of those were layups. But, he is attacking the rim more. He is getting downhill more, and he is, his three balls back. I think there's a lot of what was wrong with him was, a missing, I mean, there's some physical parts to it. I mean, I think obviously, like as Rick Carlisle kind of pointed out, he didn't have a lot of time to train after the Olympics because he was dealing with injuries coming off of that. But, and you did see some lost confidence in terms of him and trying to explode to the rim. But, a big part of it was, I mean, he just has a high standard for himself as a shooter. And when the shots were not going in and he really was missing bad, I mean, I think it really got to him mentally. I mean, you saw a different form of him mentally. And he's a guy that he is at his best when he plays with joy. Like, again, like that might sound cheesy, but it's important, for the way he plays and who he is, and his identity as a basketball player. And I think he has done a pretty good job of rediscovering, that level of joy. And you've seen him being a different basketball player. And obviously, again, he wasn't really effective last night before the injury or before he was rolled out anyway. But for the most part, if you really look over his last 15, last 20, maybe even last 25, he's a dramatically better player, than he had been. I mean, really, I think the turning point was that Milwaukee game, where he just looked miserable in the first half, did bang a couple threes in the second half, but we talked to him after and he just looked despondent. But like the next game, you saw him shake a lot of that off, start shooting. They had a friendly stretch of home games against some bad teams in that period, and it seemed to get him right. He saw the ball go in a few times, and it seems ever since then he's had a level of confidence that hadn't been there before. It seems like it's back and it stays back. I mean, so he's still obviously going to matter. I'm not going to say that they go as far as he does, but they need a really great Tyrese Haliburton to go where they want to go. I mean, I don't know. if they were to get shocking bad news, and I don't think they're going to, it doesn't even seem like this is going to require an MRI. I mean, like I asked Rick Carlisle about that, and he was like, no. But unless that changes, unless something they have some reason to believe that it's worse than it is, or worse than they seem to imply last night. They're going to have him around, and he's going to matter. He's probably not going to be an all-star, but he's starting to get back to performing at least close to all-star level. And that's the guy that they're going to need if they want to get back to where they were a year ago.
And we've talked about this before, but I've always been impressed that Haliburton is willing to acknowledge problems and try to go out of his way to fix them. I think that maybe that makes you a little more susceptible to things like this when you're a little bit more open-minded to stuff, and you're less, I'm a superstar and whatever I do makes me a superstar, therefore I will never change.
Right.
It is impressive to see him be able to adjust from this, especially given, he was in a huge shooting slump, and as you know, last 15 games he's back up to 40.5%, which is what he's typically done. So that's impressive. Obviously, we're coming up on the trade deadline. There was a lot of talk about the Pacers and trades. Anything can always happen in the trade deadline. I would guess they're less likely to do something the way they're playing now, or am I wrong?
Yeah.
Do you think they'll still look at trying to make a deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously most of the smoke was around that's been out so far has been around Cameron Johnson. All of this might have already come to pass. I think there was reporting that there had been discussions, and they might have already checked to see what the price is and decided it's too high. But ultimately, or the price is going up. But I mean, he's a guy that, based on the style they play, makes a lot of sense. A lot. And so it's one of those where it does seem like if the price was Nesmith and Toppin and picks, that's high. And if it's higher than that, that's tough. I saw some reporting that they wouldn't do it if Mathurin or Walker aren't included. And I can't imagine them being willing to part with Mathurin right now, because I think they finally feel like they're really making the progress. And I think they really have sky high hopes for him. I don't want to say I'm not as high on Walker, but I'm not as high on Walker as I am on Mathurin. I'll just
right. That's fair.
So I do see what they see in Walker. Obviously, they have a ton of size. You saw the physicality yesterday. 12 rebounds. You're like, okay, that is what you drafted. That right there is what you drafted. And he was playing physical on defense, but really physical on the glass. And that mattered, man. For as much as especially when they've got those two bigs. You could easily play, 24 seconds of good defense and play good full court pressure and everything. But if you're not finishing the play, it can still go south on you. In a lot of cases, they finished the play defensively because Walker was grabbing defensive rebounds. Again, that you circle that and say, okay, that matters. But man, Johnson, just his ability as a movement shooter. They've obviously got guys who can make threes. But they miss having a guy who can hit him in bunches, take someone in high volume. Like Cam Johnson's not Buddy Hield, but he's closer to Buddy Hield than anybody they currently have on the roster. And he just strikes me as a guy, just his fit makes sense. I covered him briefly on a freelance basis when he was at Pitt before he transferred to North Carolina. Strikes me as a really good, solid dude. Then he was playing point guard. He's playing a lot of point guard there, and he's got super high basketball IQ, would fit in with this group really well. Big guy, a lot of length, pretty good defender, and really shoot the basketball well. So it's like that in a vacuum. If it's just a question of would you like to have Cam Johnson, the answer for the Indiana Pacers would have to be yes. It's just a question of what are you willing to give up to get him, and obviously they're not the only people who think that they'd like to have him. I know there are a lot of other places where he'd be a good fit, who might be willing and maybe able even to give more to get him. But that's one I think. You do have to keep your eye on. Again, they might have already come to the point where they're like, too rich for my blood sort of thing. That is in terms of, okay, what would you want if you're them? Cam Johnson or somebody like him, is a guy I think that really fits the mold. And again, it's a question of what you're willing to give up. I mean, I do think that they love Aaron Nesmith and they love Obi Toppin. And, those guys have been, really a big deal and important. They've mattered individually, each in their own ways. Obviously, Nesmith does so many things well for you, but like Toppin is stepping his game up. I mean, again, like I wrote about it last night. He's going to start naming his dunks now on the advice of one Mike Preston. But he, it was cool to like hear him talk about that and talk about Daryl Dawkins and everything. But again, like the reason why he gets that jam over his head dunk is because he was playing full court pressure and he, read a slow kind of lazy pass from Donovan Mitchell, took it, was all by himself and had an easy dunk. And he's engaged defensively. He's engaged in the glass, and he's already, matters that much in the transition offensive game. He's shooting the ball pretty well from outside. You're getting a really good version of Obi Toppin. And so, do you ultimately get more out of Johnson than you would combine that of Nesmith and Toppin? You could make that case. But these two guys do really fit. They've got him under, Nesmith is certainly a team-friendly deal. Toppin's a reasonably team-friendly deal. They certainly are movable deals in the case that they are not crazy money based on what we're talking about, but they give you enough that you can put them together and make trades work from a money perspective. If you're looking for a $25-30 million guy, you can pair those two together, and that's 25-26 million. They give you the opportunity, but it is going to be tough to part with guys like that. And I do think they're protective of Mathurin and Walker being as young as they still are. And so it's tough to say, what are they going to be willing to part with? Because I do think they like a lot of these pieces. I don't know that they view anybody on their team right now as expendable. Certainly they have the expiring contracts of Isaiah Jackson, James Wiseman, if they wanted to move those. But they kind of like those guys too. So we'll see just what goes down. I mean, I think, they could stand pat. They could make a bold move. But again, I think it's difficult because I think they just like the assets they have and what those guys do for them on the floor.
Yeah, I think if you can make yourself better, you got to be willing to trade Walker. I mean, and anyone who has played any sort of fantasy sports knows people like their players more than they should. And I think that applies generally to the real thing too. So if you think you're making a trade without – now, again, given the way they're going, the Pacers are going right now, I understand standing pat. I don't know that I would make the trade, but Toppin and Naismith and a first round. Be a little worried about an unprotected first round pick, but a lightly protected first round pick for Cam Johnson. That's really hard to turn down.
Sure.
In a vacuum. I mean, if you have Johnson, you don't really need Toppin or Naismith because he's got to play those minutes. So that's how I look at it. But I also get right now you're on an incredible roll. You love how the pieces fit. Maybe you don't want to do it. All right.
I do think it goes back to it does go back to your Carlisle point though. He has had a really good sense for these guys, and I think part of what has kept this group connected is he believes in them like a lot, and he shows that belief. And I think there's a lot of you definitely see what he's done probably as well, maybe as he ever has, and he's doing very, very well, is like showing respect to these guys and like not deference to a point of like letting them run the thing, but there is just a sense of he believes in the personalities. He believes in the humans as much as he believes in the players. And, little things that he does, like, like not last night, but 2 nights ago. So they came in early, they generally come in early, but like, obviously like they went to Arizona for TJ McConnell's Ring of Honor thing. 2 nights ago, Enrique Freeman had his high school number retired and all those guys went. This 2-way contract guy, was inactive last night. But whole team went to go see that, and he pushes for things like that. He celebrates things like that. And so he just gets down and defends these guys. And I do think that, he's going to fight to keep them. And I think, Pritchard has said in the past, he's like, he said this a few times. He's like, I've never enjoyed a team like I'm enjoying this team. I think he said it last year. It's my favorite team. He said it's my favorite team I've ever been around. And he even said that 2 years ago. It's mostly the same group that we're talking about here. But going back to 2022, 23, he's like, I found myself really emotional having to move on from these guys, and they didn't change a lot. And so they really believe in the chemistry. And they've stuck with that. And I think, like if you look at a guy like Mathurin has given them. Mathurin has done what they've asked, and like I think you had to look at him as a guy that you could move if he wasn't going to become the player they've asked him to become. But he has. He has taken what was asked. He's taken the prescription of, you got to be a quicker decision maker. You're not going to take a ton of shots, like you're not going to drive into crowds. You have to be quick and you have to defend. And he said, okay, I'll do it. Now he didn't do it. It didn't take like that. But over the course of the last 2 years, he has turned into the player they've asked him to become. And when you get that kind of buy-in and you, get people ultimately becoming who you ask them to be, you develop a sense of loyalty there. And loyalty does matter, and it does turn into things. So I think that is going to be a fine line for them to walk. Now, again, they've been willing to make trades in the past. They've been willing to move on from guys that they've loved, including Buddy Hield, including Jalen Smith. The business of the game has, led them to make some of those calls. But I mean, they are definitely going to value those guys and the contributions they've already made and the development that they've already made. And that's going to be part of the equation. Again, I think there might be opportunities they just can't pass up again. And I think, again, if the cost of Cam Johnson is already well above Aaron Nesmith and Obi Toppin, they might be piecing out of that. But that will, I think, still be if that is the cost, that is still going to be a tough call for them to make.
All right, we will cut it off here because Dustin has to get on the road and back to Indy from Cleveland. But we appreciate you listening. Go to IndyStar.com for everything on the Pacers.